All right, so buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving headfirst into one of the most talked about UFO cases out there. The Lakenheath-Bentwaters Incident, or as some folks call it, the Rendlesham Forest Incident. We're talking December 1980, twin Royal Air Force bases in Suffolk, England. And get this, the witnesses, not your average UFO enthusiasts, but military personnel.
And that right there is what makes this case so fascinating. You have these multiple credible witnesses, air traffic controllers, security personnel, even high-ranking officers all reporting seeing something truly bizarre in the skies.
Exactly. And we're going to try to untangle all of this today. We've got a whole pile of articles, reports, witness testimonies. So our mission today is to sift through all of it and try to figure out what exactly happened back in December 1980, and more importantly, why it's still being debated even today. So to set the stage a little bit, we're in the middle of the Cold War. Tensions are high between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And it all kicks off on December 26 with reports of strange lights hovering over Rendlesham Forest, right near those RAF bases.
Oh yeah, everyone was on edge back then. So when these unexplained lights appeared, well, let's just say imaginations ran wild.
So over the next few nights, things escalate, leading to this close encounter on the 28th that still has people scratching their heads. But what were they actually seeing? Was it just some distant blinking lights, or was there more to it?
Well, the descriptions from the witnesses are incredibly consistent. They're talking about triangular or diamond-shaped objects, pulsating colored lights, and the movements, unlike anything any aircraft could do back then.
Whoa, okay, so it wasn't just some blurry lights in the distance. They're seeing distinct shapes, colors, specific movements.
Absolutely. Some even reported seeing smaller orb-like objects zipping around those larger crafts, almost like they were escorting them. And here's where things get really interesting. Many witnesses describe these objects as defying physics, like hovering silently, then suddenly taking off at unbelievable speeds.
Okay, now I'm picturing this. Cold War tension, military on high alert, and then these unidentified objects doing things that would make even a seasoned pilot do a double take.
It's no surprise that people started thinking about everything from secret Soviet technology to, visitors from somewhere a little further away.
Okay, let's talk about that close encounter on December 28th. This is where things go from, that's weird, to, whoa, hold on a minute. Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston and his team, they're sent into Rendlesham Forest to investigate the lights. And what they find is anything but ordinary.
Peniston's account of that night is truly chilling. He describes touching the surface of the object, feeling its metallic texture, even seeing strange symbols etched on its side. And then, poof, it's gone. Vanishes into the night sky at an incredible speed. Imagine experiencing that firsthand. It's no wonder those involved were deeply affected by it all.
It sounds like something right out of the X-Files. A physical encounter, strange symbols, it's enough to make you think twice, right? But of course, the military doesn't just ignore this. They launch a full-blown investigation. Interviews, radar analysis, the works. You'd think with all that manpower and technology, they'd figure it out.
Well, that's where things get a bit tricky. Despite their best efforts, the official reports were inconclusive. They couldn't definitively say what these objects were or where they came from. And this lack of a clear answer just deepened the mystery. And, of course, gave rise to a whole bunch of theories trying to explain what really went down in Rendlesham Forest.
Almost like the more they investigated, the less they knew. And this is where Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt comes in. He was actually there during some of the later sightings and reported seeing those strange lights and beams himself. But what makes Halt's story really interesting is that he also documented physical evidence, things like indentations in the ground and elevated radiation levels in the area where the objects were seen.
Yeah, Halt's reports really threw a curveball into things. Here you have a high-ranking officer, someone known for being level-headed, contradicting the idea that it was all just a big misunderstanding. Makes you wonder why he'd risk his reputation like that if he didn't truly believe something extraordinary happened.
That's a good point. It's not like he had anything to gain by going against the official narrative. So we have credible witnesses, some even reporting physical evidence, official investigations that hit a dead end. It's like the perfect recipe for some serious speculation. So given all of this, what are some of the explanations people have come up with?
Well, there are a few theories that have been swirling around ever since that December night in 1980. Some people believe that those objects were actually advanced, top-secret aircraft, maybe developed by the U.S., maybe the Soviets, playing into those Cold War anxieties. And it's not completely impossible. Governments could have been experimenting with technology way beyond what anyone knew about.
Right, so maybe it was some cutting-edge stealth tech that just happened to spook a bunch of RAF personnel. But then, of course, there's the other explanation, the one that really captures the imagination.
Ah, yes, the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
The idea that what was seen in Rendlesham Forest was truly alien in origin. I mean, the advanced technology, the impossible maneuvers, it's easy to see why people jump to aliens.
And many of the witnesses themselves believe they encountered something otherworldly. Their descriptions are full of awe and wonder, mixed with a healthy dose of fear, as if they had seen something that completely shattered their understanding of what's possible.
So it's more about the what than the who, right?
Yeah,
The focus is on those incredible capabilities rather than proving there were little green men piloting the thing.
exactly. Though it is important to remember that even though eyewitness testimony can be compelling, it's not always the most reliable. Memories can change, perceptions can be skewed. So while their accounts are fascinating, they don't equal definitive proof of aliens.
And then, of course, we've got the skeptics, the folks who believe the whole incident was nothing more than a psychological operation, a hoax or a tactic to mess with the RAF.
Yeah, some proponents of this theory point to those Cold War tensions. They argue that the lights could have been part of a disinformation campaign to sow confusion or test the RAF's readiness.
Like a real-life War of the Worlds, creating panic to see how people react.
Right, but this theory, like the others, has its problems. If it was a hoax, it would require a ton of planning and coordination. And like with the other theories, there's no solid evidence to back it up.
So it seems like we're left with a giant question mark, more questions than answers. But honestly, that's what makes the Lakenheath-Bentwaters incident so captivating. It reminds us that we don't have all the answers, that there's still things out there we can't easily explain.
And it pushes us to think critically, weigh the evidence, and come to our own conclusions. It's a story that encourages us to be open-minded, curious, and never stop searching for the truth, even when it feels out of reach.
Couldn't have said it better myself. But the impact of Lakenheath-Bentwaters goes beyond just debates and research. This event had real-world consequences. It affected government policies and made the public more aware of the whole UFO phenomenon. So let's dive into that aspect of the story when we come back. We'll explore the legacy of Rendlesham Forest and what it means for how we think about the unknown. Stay tuned.
All right, welcome back. Before we jump into those theories, though, I kind of want to talk about the whole fascination with the Lakenheath-Bentwaters incident. I mean, this isn't just some forgotten event. It's become this cultural touchstone, a story that still grabs people's attention and sparks debate all these years later.
Yeah, totally. I mean, think about it. Something that happened over 40 years ago, and we're still talking about it, making documentaries, even movies and TV shows about it.
Yeah.
What is it about this specific UFO event that keeps drawing people back?
Well, I think a big part of it is the mystery. We have all these credible witnesses, some physical evidence even, and yet no real answers. That kind of ambiguity, it creates this breeding ground for theories and intrigue.
Like a puzzle with missing pieces.
Yeah,
And everyone's trying to figure out how they fit together.
exactly. And it's not just folks messing around at home either. Serious researchers are still digging into the details, trying to find something that might have been missed.
Like a cold case that just won't quit.
Exactly. Lakenheath-Bentwaters has become this landmark case for UFO researchers all over the world. They're going over every single detail, looking at the witness testimonies, trying to use all these new scientific methods on the evidence. They're hoping for any little clue that might explain what happened that night.
And even with all the advancements in technology and how we understand the universe, it's crazy how this incident from 1980 is still such a head-scratcher.
I think that's a big part of why it stuck with us for so long. It forces us to admit that we don't know everything, that there are things out there we might not fully understand, even with all our fancy technology.
Okay, so let's circle back to those theories for a minute. We talked about a few secret aircraft, extraterrestrials, maybe even some kind of psychological operation. What are the pros and cons of each of these explanations?
All right, let's start with the secret aircraft theory. Interesting idea, but it has its limitations.
Yeah, walk me through it.
Well, those who support this idea point to the fact that the US and the Soviet Union were in this crazy technological race during the Cold War, so it's possible that one or both of them were developing super advanced aircraft.
Okay.
Aircraft that could be mistaken for something a lot more, well, alien, I guess you could say.
Okay, that makes sense. But wouldn't there be some record of this, some indication that this technology existed? You'd think someone would have come forward by now.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But despite all the research, all the Freedom of Information Act requests, nothing concrete has come up to support the idea that these were secret aircraft. So without official confirmation or documentation, it's all just speculation.
Okay, so what about the extraterrestrial hypothesis? That seems to be the most popular one, at least with the public.
Oh, for sure.
But is there any evidence that actually supports the idea that what people saw at Rendlesham Forest was, alien?
Well, the biggest piece of evidence for this one comes from the witnesses themselves. Those descriptions of the objects, how advanced they seem to be, those impossible movements, all of that suggests technology way beyond anything we had on Earth back then. So some argue that, right there, points to an extraterrestrial origin.
So it's less about actually proving there were aliens and more about just how crazy advanced these things were.
Exactly. But we got to remember that eyewitness accounts, even though they can be super interesting, can also be unreliable. People remember things differently, memories fade, they can be influenced by all sorts of things. So while those stories are fascinating, they don't exactly prove we had visitors from another planet.
Okay, then there's the psychological operations theory. This one says that the whole thing was staged.
Like some kind of elaborate prank on the RAF.
Yeah, either a hoax or some weird Cold War tactic.
Interesting. So those who support this theory point to the fact that, again, we're in the middle of the Cold War. They say those lights could have been part of a plan to spread false information, create confusion, or test how ready the RAF was.
Almost like a real-life war of the worlds, freaking everyone out to see how they react.
Exactly. But this theory, just like the others, has its weaknesses. If it was a hoax, it would have been a really complex one. A ton of coordination would have been needed. And, like the others, there's no solid evidence to prove it happened.
So it seems like no matter which way we turn, we hit a dead end. Lots of questions, very few answers.
That's the thing about Lakenheath-Bentwaters. It reminds us that we don't have it all figured out, that there are still things out there that we just can't easily explain.
Right, and maybe that's the point. It forces us to think critically, look at the evidence, and decide for ourselves what we believe.
It encourages us to be curious, to keep asking questions, and to never stop searching for the truth, even when it seems impossible to find.
Well said. But the Lakenheath-Bentwaters incident wasn't just about debates and research. It had a real impact on the world. It changed how governments dealt with UFO sightings and brought the whole phenomenon into the public eye. So let's talk about that when we come back after a quick break. We'll explore the legacy of Rendlesham Forest and what it means for how we understand the unknown. And we're back, ready to wrap up our exploration of the Lakenheath-Bentwaters incident. It's kind of wild how this one event, way back in 1980, has had such a lasting impact. Not just on those who were there, but on how we think about UFOs in general.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just a local thing. Lakenheath-Bentwaters really pushed governments to take the whole UFO phenomenon more seriously.
So let's talk about that. How did this incident change the way governments handled UFO sightings?
Well, you got to remember, this is a Cold War. Everyone was on edge, lots of secrets flying around. But this incident forced governments, especially the US and the UK, to admit that something strange was happening, even if they didn't know what it was.
Right, because it wasn't just some random folks seeing lights in the sky. It was military personnel, people trained to observe and report.
Exactly. And when you have high-ranking officers like Lieutenant Colonel Halt speaking out about their experiences, the evidence they saw, well, it's hard to ignore that.
So what did governments actually do? Did they create any new policies or investigations because of incidents like Lakenheath-Bentwaters?
It's a bit complicated. You see, in the US, there was definitely renewed interest in investigating UFOs. Project Blue Book, which had been shut down in the late 60s, was seen as a failure. People wanted a more thorough and transparent approach.
So did they get it? Did things actually change?
Not immediately, no. But incidents like Lakenheath-Bentwaters did shift the conversation. There was this growing acceptance within the government that UFOs couldn't just be brushed aside.
So even if they weren't making big announcements, behind the scenes they were starting to take it seriously.
Exactly. And over time, this led to new programs, mostly kept secret, that focused on collecting and analyzing UFO data. One example is the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. It was run by the Pentagon and investigated reports of what they called unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs.
Okay, so the seeds were planted, even if the results were kept hush-hush. But did these changes help us understand UFOs any better? Did we get any closer to figuring out what they are?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? They collected a lot of information, but most of it is still classified, so it's tough to say how much progress was actually made in understanding what UFOs are and where they come from.
So it's like we took one step forward by acknowledging the phenomenon, but then a couple steps back by keeping everything secret.
I think that's a fair assessment.
And that's probably why people are still so fascinated by UFOs, especially cases like Lakenheath-Bentwaters.
It's a story that's always evolving, with new information popping up all the time.
If you think about what else might be out there.
Yeah. Absolutely. It challenges everything we think we know and forces us to consider possibilities that might seem unbelievable at first.
It reminds us that we don't have all the answers, and that sometimes the search for answers is just as important as the answers themselves.
Couldn't have put it better myself.
Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our deep dives into the Lakenheath-Bentwaters incident. We've covered a lot of ground today, from those first strange lights over Rendlesham Forest to the lasting impact this event has had on our understanding of the unknown. We've talked about eyewitness accounts, official investigations, and the many theories that attempt to explain what happened. But ultimately, the mystery remains.
And that's the beauty of it, isn't it? It keeps us curious, it keeps us asking questions, and it reminds us that there's still so much out there that we don't understand.
Exactly. So if this conversation has sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to keep exploring. There are tons of resources out there. See classified documents, witness testimonies, books, articles, all sorts of stuff. Dig in, do some research, and see what conclusions you come to.
And don't forget to share your thoughts with us. What do you think happened in Rendlesham Forest? We're always up for a good discussion.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep your minds open and keep looking up at the stars. You never know what you might find.